Hi, I'm Sam Candy. Welcome to Sustain Talks. Today, I'm joined by Martin Rich, co-founder and executive director of Future Fit Foundation. Hello, Martin. How are you?
Hey, Sam. Lovely to be with you. I'm well, thanks. And yourself?
Yeah, really good. Thanks. Good to have you here. I'm going to let you do the intro to you because you'll do it much more justice. Why don't you tell us a bit more about you, your background, and a bit about Future Fit Foundation?
Fantastic. So quick background. I'm an ex-investment banker. I spent the first 13 years of my career in derivative structuring and marketing, HSBC, JP Morgan, UBS. And then I moved into the impact investment space, where I was sales director at an organization called Social Finance, where we launched the first social impact bonds and things like that, where I was selling these impact investments that were financing social enterprises and charities, selling them to mainstream investors and foundations and high net worths. And through that sort of journey from banking to impact, began to realize that there wasn't a mechanism for investors to understand the true impact of any portfolio, because as we now know, every portfolio has an impact on planet and society, some good, some bad. But what is that? What does that look like? And a very long 8-year story, very short. I met my co-founder who was working with multinational companies and trying to show them how to be truly sustainable. And we said, hey, if we can show one company, what does it mean to live within the planetary and societal boundaries? How do they actually do that? How do they measure that? And if we could do that in a repeatable way, we could aggregate that across a portfolio and we could show investors or banks what their money is financing, good or bad. And then we can help companies move in the right direction, and we can help those with the money and investing in them to help those companies to move in the right direction. And in a nutshell, that's what Future Fit Foundation has created, and that's what we're all about, helping companies to become truly sustainable, to radically transform, and we're helping investors and banks to put their money in to support those companies in that transition.
Yeah, it's been a big few weeks in terms of climate change and the conversations.
Yes.
And from your point of view, big question, but what do you think the future looks like in terms of societal change and climate change?
Gosh, well, right now, the future, if we're honest, looks pretty bleak. And you look at what's happening environmentally, you look at the pathways that we're on. 2.4 to 2.9 degrees of warming seems to be the range that people are coming out with the projections, looking at the promises and all the rest of it. And of course, depending on how many of the pledges and things get kept. But that's way too hot still. It's better than where we were aiming. That's good. But even at 2.4, 2.9, the risks of systemic existential events happening climate-wise, so permafrost melting, methane in the oceans getting released, all that sort of stuff, that is truly existential to humanity. Not wishing to sound overly dramatic, but if these things happen, global supply chains fall apart, global crop shortages, etc. And we know that modern day society is terrible at dealing with these things. I mean, for goodness sake, in this country a few weeks ago, we weren't short of fuel, but you couldn't get any. People are not good at dealing with these situations. So that doesn't bode well. Things are definitely changing. The climate is definitely fighting back, if you like. And societally, we only need to look at all of the injustice and inequality around the world. Yes, again, society's made some great steps forward against things like absolute number of people in poverty, maternal health and issues like that. Great strides have been made. The COVID vaccines, great strides have been made. But at the same time, look at the amount of injustice that's still there. Again, the vaccines are a great display. You and I, Sam, are probably booked in for our third boosters. Sorry, I'm being rude about your age here, but certainly I am.
I'm trying to get.
And so many people in the world, haven't even had one.
Yeah.
So the picture right now looking forward is, quite frankly, pretty gloomy. But hopefully, as we'll unpack in this conversation, I'm not a doomsayer. I think the downside is very bad, but actually I'm super optimistic about where the future could go. And again, that's what gets me out of bed every day.
Yeah, I think you have to be optimistic, especially when you're talking about this. Otherwise, it can be, it can give you anxiety if you're not optimistic. If you was to look at something that people urgently need to change, what would that be?
The first thing we always say, the easiest thing to change is your energy supply.
Right.
Sounds simple, but actually, and it is. So as an individual at home or in the business where you work, one of the easiest things you can do is change to renewable energy, because the more pressure we all put into the system demanding that, the more that helps that side of things to grow. Now, the UK actually isn't too badly positioned. It's working quite well in terms of the amount of renewable energy we've got coming into the grid, but we need a lot more. I always say ecotricity are brilliant. I have no connection to them, so there's no links, but I personally, in my house, we use them as a supplier. All the money that they receive goes into building the infrastructure that they then supply into the grid. So one easy thing that anybody can do, partly make sure you're using less energy, and the electricity that you are using, make sure it's from renewable sources, and really look into those renewable sources. Don't just rely on big suppliers who are using renewable energy certificates. Actually try and get to people who are supplying from renewable sources.
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of talk over the last few weeks about COP26. Tell me a bit about your views, positive and negative.
Yeah. And it is a bit of both, right? I think it was exciting to see some of the announcements coming out of that. I mean, let's start broad blush. Is history going to look back and say COP26, wow, that was the moment? No, I just don't think it is, right? It wasn't a landmark event. Unfortunately, I think our government did a pretty rubbish job of, it just left it too late. I think Kwasi Kwarteng himself did as good a job as he could, but I mean, he didn't get the brief until, what was it, March or something? I mean, ridiculous. You look back at Paris, which was a success. I believe they spent at least 18 months prepping for all of that. So not really surprising that we didn't get more out of it. But the fact that Modi from India took the opportunity to take center stage and make the pledges he made within India, amazing, fantastic. Yes, probably not enough, and yes, too slow. But just even the fact that he's now there, and India's now there, and saying those targets are only going to come in, hopefully. So that was good. Coal being mentioned, okay, phase down, not phase out, but still it's there. So all of that was progress. But I think what really shone out for me is we cannot look, sadly, to governments and all governments for coordinated global action in this way. I mean, the fact that there were some very notable individuals who just didn't turn up, and you look at just the wrangling that's going on generally, it's hard to see really pointed action. And I think that's where the private sector and the civil society really come into their own. And it's exciting to see people really taking hold of this agenda and pushing it forward. So I think probably the best things that happened in at COP, whether, the coffee shop conversations, the late night glasses of wine and whiskey, I think actually that's probably where the relationships were built, the true pledges were made. So, of course, now we absolutely need to follow all of this up with action. Action is 100% where it takes, where we'll actually make some progress. So net, Sam, I'm a little bit in the middle on it. Yeah, there
Yeah.
was some good stuff. No, it wasn't the breakthrough. I don't think any of us had really expected that it would be. But fantastic that companies are realizing they have to take these issues seriously. I think the challenge that we have now in the coming years is, okay, you've got the message. Now we need to turn your pledges and often greenwashing into actual tangible things that you will do as an organization that will then lead to those action or those pledges becoming actions. And then obviously those actions actually leading to the positive outcomes that we're wanting. Yeah. But at least people are sort of, coming into the hopper.
Yeah. A lot of those pledges are, we're getting to net zero. Tell us a little bit more about your views of net zero.
Well, again, it's sort of, conceptually, absolutely. I mean, one of the key tenets of Future Fit is zero greenhouse gas emissions from your products and also from your operation. So on that basis, getting to zero, absolutely critical. Net is the word where I think we begin to trip up. And of course, the reality for so many of these companies is, no, you're not. You've pledged you're getting, no, you're not. You have no clue how you are going to do this. And even worse, you can't do it.
Yeah.
If you look at that in isolation, right, there is no way you are going to get your company from where you are today to net zero simply by, wishing the problem away or hoping you can plant trees and buy carbon offsets to get yourself out of trouble, right? That is not what gets us to a long-term sustainable future. Yes, those mechanisms have a role to play in the transition. And of course, planting trees is a good thing. But what we need to recognize is there is a fundamental shift needed in the way individual business and our whole global economy works, because it doesn't work. It is broken. And I think this is one of the key messages we keep trying to get across to people. The fundamental system no longer works. We have reached the extremes of what the system that we have set up globally is capable of doing. And shuffling forward within this system is simply not an option. Incremental progress and getting slightly better whilst we still try and maintain the system, it will not work.
Yeah.
The system is broken. It cannot manage at this scale of humanity on the planet and scale of resource usage. We have to change.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a binary change. And the negative is, what we painted right back at the start of the conversation. It's actually a really, really bad and bleak outcome. But there is an alternative, which is a very positive, but very different, I think, flourishing future for society, but will look very different to what we've got today. It's a huge mindset shift for everybody to get there. But shuffling along, the middle course is simply not an option. So it ultimately comes down to the choice of, do you want the good of, cake or death, to quote Eddie Izzard. And, personally, cake is the right, is the right outcome. And all of this stuff around sort of net zero and thing, it's kind of like, dipping your toe in the water. And it's kind of saying, I get we need to change. And I kind of feel I need to be on this bandwagon. But too many chief execs are signing up without really thinking through what it means.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, given the short tenure of so many of them, it's not them or even their successor or their successor's problem. It's several down the line who are suddenly going to be hit with that. But of course, you can't carry on like this and then overnight go to zero. You've got to think about, how do I fundamentally change everything I'm doing to provide my purpose, my products or my services? What is it I'm bringing to society, and how do I do that in a radically different way that will encompass zero, not net zero, will encompass zero greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah.
But what else do I have to change as well? So bigger picture thinking, far more transformational thinking needed. But hey, trying to be positive, at least people are beginning to get on the bandwagon. We need to now just make sure they don't just sort of say, oh, I've signed that, I'm good, and not do anything.
Yeah, and so it's more societal change comes first. You know, you really have to think about that. Societal change, sustainable change. You know, you obviously people do still need to carry on planting trees, but you're right, it has to be more than that. It has to come within the business, right? Or within the person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, fundamentally, we cannot achieve this without societal change going hand in hand. I mean, you know, interestingly, if you go sort of, you know, right back to Adams and the Wealth of Nations and all of that, you know, good stuff. All of that was written from a perspective that actually looking after your society, looking after your neighbor and community, sort of good ethics, ethical behavior, et cetera, was taken as read, right? You know, that was his other book. And it was just assumed that that was a bedrock of how you then did business. And of course, sadly, as we've, you know, come through the last couple of 100 years, society's focused more and more and more on the business, you know, the business of business is business, and quietly sort of forgotten the ethics and morality of broader society underlying this. And without going down too many sort of rabbit holes here, you know, I think a lot of the sort of the social justice stuff that we're seeing now is kind of like a rebound of that, right? It's like it's gone so far down that we're now seeing sort of a rebound and focusing in on specific issues and things like that. And so it all becomes a complete mess because you start trying to sort of, you know, target individual things rather than actually having this fundamental underlying, you know, belief and desire to target as broad and a set of justice and equality as we can have, whilst using business as the servant of that society rather than society being the servant of business, which is what it's become. So societal change in that mindset, working out how we get, you know, the West is very bad at being very egocentric, very money-centered. You know, the decisions are about me, my happiness. You know, look at so many of the ills in Western society. They actually come back to this sort of, you know, breakdown of community, breakdown of family. And so much of that is pushed by this message of actually, you know, Sam, it's all about you and your happiness. Well, again, yes, of course, that's important, but actually your happiness and your flourishing and fulfillment surely actually should be flowing out of the family and community around you. And that's part and parcel of that. And I think we've lost so much of that. So then to be saying, hey, we have to take account of broader society, we have to take account of the planet, because this is to the benefit of us all. Well, if you're coming at that from a very egocentric perspective, why do you care?
Yeah.
So I think these things have to go hand in hand. We cannot have one without the other. I mean, a final point on that, if I can squeeze it in. William Wilberforce, one of my heroes, his book on the abolition of slavery and just the journey of doing all that. I mean, fantastic, but very, very hard to read because obviously written in Victorian English. But the book is actually also entitled The Reformation of Manners. So it's the abolition of slavery and the Reformation of Manners, which is a glorious Victorian expression for basically saying society pulling its socks back up.
Yeah.
And what he was saying is, yes, there's lots of practical business related bits that we need to do to abolish slavery, but actually we need to re-find our soul, our heart as a society that leads us to also want to do that. So it's just interesting, you know, all the way back. You can look at Adams, you can look at Wilberforce. Oh, there was always this dual piece needed. So
yeah, I read a lot about monks and about happiness comes from helping others. And I think that whole, sustainable, socially responsible, it all comes, you can't just say in this corner we're going to be sustainable, but then we're going to treat our workforce badly, or we're not going to do good in the community. So it really, really does come as a package. And what have been your biggest learnings over the last year and a half? I mean, obviously with COVID, it must have...
over the last year, so probably number one was that I can work from home on my own without going completely insane, which was probably the biggest surprise to everybody, along with the fact that I've learned to cook, which has pleased my wife no end. On a more serious note, I actually, for us, one of the most transformational pieces that I've read and really been inspired by is the work of Rethink X, Jamie Arbib and Tony Sieber's work, and an article, a little booklet that they published called Rethinking Humanity. Highly recommend people go and read that. It's a free download. Just Google Rethinking Humanity. And it's a 90-page document, and it talks, a lot actually of what I've already been talking about these exponential up and downsides. Actually, is inspired directly from what those guys have written. So I think for me, that's been the biggest awakening, is realizing that actually the problem was even worse than I thought it was, and I thought it was pretty bad to start with. But actually beginning to really see this hopeful pathway out of where we are, and it won't be smooth and it won't be easy, and it calls for radical shifts in the way we do things. But actually, the possibility of a future with cheap, unlimited supplies of renewable energy, access to food and information for everyone cheaply, says maybe, just maybe, we can have a flourishing future with 9 or 10 billion people on the planet. We can move to this age of creation, as they call it, rather than age of extraction that we're in now. I just think that's such an exciting vision to be just thinking about and working toward, and saying, you know what, that's what I'm going to try and create. That's what we as Future Fit and others are trying to create as a movement around the world. And I don't know whether we will collectively be successful or not, but I would rather be aiming for that than just, putting up with the status quo, or worse, taking us off the edge of the cliff.
Yeah. Martin, you actually answered my last question, which is who inspires you, and the book you read. So definitely going to download that. Thank you for your time. We are really pleased that Future Fit Foundation is actually going to be a partner of the Responsible Futures Conference. You can obviously see why we wanted to partner with you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight. This has been fascinating. You always fascinate me. I always love listening to you. So thank you very much for your time, and have a very good rest of the day.
Thanks, Sam. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Bye-bye.